The human German shepherd's jaws clamped down on the alien child's leg, with a sickening crunch, dragging her kicking and screaming from the rubble of her bombed-out home. Just minutes before, 8-year-old Draco was playing in the sprawling gardens of the Tarkalian High Commander's estate with Zorthnax, her furry six-legged lizard pet. An ear-splitting boom suddenly rocked the ground. Smoke plumed on the horizon as unfamiliar ships rained fire on the city defenses. Tarkalian soldiers scattered, their weapons useless against the invaders breaching the outer walls. "Draco, take this!" Her father Zorgax thrust a small crystal into her hands. "Run to the forest, activate it when you're safe. It will guide you to an escape pod bound for our hidden moon base." "The humans found us. They want revenge for us limiting their galactic expansion." Zorgax grabbed a plasma rifle from the wall. "I have to defend the city. Now go!" Tears streaked Draco's blue cheeks as she sprinted into the forest clutching the beacon. Weapons fire lit the smoke-choked sky. Tarkalian ships spiraled down in flames. The sounds of battle grew louder. Draco glanced back to see her father charge into the fray against the relentless human forces. She prayed to the gods that he would survive this hellish day. Draco ducked and weaved through the dense underbrush, using his small size to his advantage. He could hear the heavy footsteps of the human soldiers crashing through the forest behind him. He risked a glance over his shoulder and saw 5 soldiers clad in advanced combat armor, energy weapons at the ready. The leader, a battle-scarred man with a scar down his left cheek, barked orders to the others. Take the Tarkalian alive. He might know something about their defenses. Draco's heart raced as he pushed himself to run faster, but exhaustion and fear got the better of him. He stumbled over a gnarled root and fell hard, the beacon flying from his grasp. Zorthnax skidded to a stop and turned to face the approaching humans. The little creature planted himself between Draco and the soldiers, growling fiercely despite his small size. The human leader paused, surprised by Zorthnax's show of courage. He leveled his weapon at the creature, finger tightening on the trigger. Suddenly, an ear-splitting roar shook the forest. A massive shape burst from the undergrowth, all claws and teeth and fury. It was a Sargus beast, a ferocious predator native to the Tarkalian homeworld. The humans opened fire, energy blasts lighting up the forest, but the Sargus beast's thick hide absorbed the shots like they were nothing. The creature barreled into the soldiers, teeth flashing. 2 men went down screaming as the beast mauled them with ruthless savagery. Draco scrambled to his feet and snatched up the beacon. This was his chance. He turned and sprinted deeper into the forest, Zorthnax close on his heels. Behind him, the sounds of battle raged on as the Sargus beast turned its attention to the human leader. Draco ran until his lungs burned, frantically fiddling with the beacon controls. He had to reach the escape pod. He had to survive. The fate of his people might depend on it. Draco's heart raced as he frantically punched commands into the beacon. It lit up with a soft blue glow, projecting a shimmering holographic map into the air. A pulsing red dot marked his destination, the hidden escape pod that promised safety from the chaos engulfing his world. He took off through the undergrowth, weaving between the towering trees, the beacon clutched tight in his shaking hands. A sudden yelp pierced the air behind him. Draco skidded to a stop, whirling around to see Zorthnax crumpled on the ground, whimpering in pain. A smoking wound marred his flank, where a stray energy blast had found its mark. Torn between his desperate need to escape and his love for his loyal companion, Draco hesitated for only a moment before racing back to Zorthnax's side. "It's okay, buddy," he whispered, gathering the injured creature into his arms. Zorthnax nuzzled his hand weakly, his big eyes filled with trust. Draco held him close, feeling the warmth of his fur against his skin. With renewed determination, he set off once more towards the escape pod, his pace slowed by Zorthnax's added weight. In the heart of the ravaged forest, Captain Hunter stood over the corpse of the Sargus beast, his armor splattered with its dark blood. Smoke curled from the barrel of his rifle, where he'd put a round through the creature's eye, ending its rampage. He turned to his remaining men, his face grim. "The Tarkalian child is our top priority. He may hold the key to ending this war." Hunter's gaze swept over Sergeant Thompson and Private Kim, assessing them. "Split up and find him. Capture him alive if possible, but don't let him escape. Understood?" As the soldiers fanned out into the forest, Draco ducked behind a massive tree trunk, his heart pounding against his ribs. The beacon's map showed he was close to the escape pod, but he could hear heavy footsteps approaching fast. Clutching Zorthnax tighter, he held his breath, praying to the gods that he wouldn't be discovered. Private Kim moved methodically through the undergrowth, his weapon sweeping back and forth as he scanned for any sign of the Tarkalian child. A sudden rustle in a nearby bush made him whirl around, finger tightening on the trigger. A small, furry creature burst out from the leaves, chittering in alarm. Kim fired on instinct, the energy blast searing the air and missing the creature by inches. The shot slammed into the tree trunk beside Draco's head, showering him with burning splinters. Draco bit back a scream, his grip on Zorthnax faltering. The injured creature slipped from his grasp, falling to the ground with a soft thud. Kim's head snapped towards the sound, his eyes narrowing. He began to move toward Draco's hiding place, weapon at the ready. Just as Draco thought it was over, a thunderous bark ripped through the forest. Private Kim spun around, weapon raised, as a massive black shape exploded from the undergrowth. It was a dog, a German shepherd, sleek ebony fur rippling over coiled muscles. The dog's powerful jaws clamped onto Kim's arm, wrenching him off balance. Kim cried out, struggling to break free, as the dog dragged him to the ground. Draco recognized the dog's silver collar. It was one of the genetically engineered K9 units used by the human military, separated from its handler in the chaos of battle. The dog pinned Kim, teeth bared, seeing the soldier as a threat to the Tarkalian child. Draco snatched up Zorthnax and ran, his heart pounding. The beacon led him to a small clearing where the escape pod waited, disguised by a shimmering force field. But Sergeant Thompson stood guard, energy rifle trained on the pod's entrance. The German shepherd bounded into the clearing, placing itself between Draco and Thompson, hackles raised. Thompson hesitated, confused by the dog's behavior. Why was it protecting the alien child? The dog snarled, lips peeled back from gleaming fangs. It inched forward, forcing Thompson to take a step back, his aim wavering. Draco sprinted for the pod, Zorthnax clutched to his chest. He slammed his hand against the access panel, and the force field dissipated. The hatch hissed open. Laser blasts sizzled through the air as Thompson fired, but the dog lunged, jaws snapping at the rifle. Thompson stumbled back, cursing. Draco practically threw Zorthnax into the pod before scrambling in after him. His shaking fingers flew over the control panel, initiating the launch sequence. The escape pod rocketed away from the ravaged surface of the Tarkalian homeworld, punching through the atmosphere in a blaze of superheated gases. Draco gripped the controls with shaking hands, his heart still pounding from his narrow escape. Beside him, Zorthnax whimpered softly, his wounded flank leaving a smear of dark blood on the pod's pristine white interior. Draco reached for the pod's medical kit, his fingers fumbling with the latch. He pulled out a tube of healing gel and a roll of pressure bandages, the sterile packaging crinkling loudly in the confined space. "Hold still, buddy," Draco murmured, carefully applying the gel to Zorthnax's injury. The creature flinched but held steady as Draco wound the bandage around his torso, securing it tightly. As the pod hurtled towards the hidden moon base, the view screen flickered to life, displaying a scene of utter chaos. The blackness of space was illuminated by the flashes of weapons fire and the bright trails of missiles as the Tarkalian fleet clashed with the human armada. The Tarkalian ships moved with a fluid grace, their sleek forms twisting and turning to evade the relentless barrage from the human vessels. Their advanced shields flared and pulsed, absorbing the brunt of the damage and allowing them to return fire with their own potent weapons. Draco watched in awe as a Tarkalian cruiser unleashed a volley of plasma torpedoes, the glowing projectiles slamming into the hull of a human destroyer and reducing it to a cloud of expanding debris. But for every human ship destroyed, 2 more seemed to take its place, their hulls bristling with guns and missile launchers. Suddenly the pod shuddered violently, alarms blaring as red warning lights pulsed on the control panel. Draco's heart leapt into his throat as he realized they'd been hit by a stray missile, the impact sending them careening off course. The pod spun wildly, the moon's cratered surface filling the view screen as they plummeted towards it. Draco fought to regain control, his fingers flying over the controls as he tried to stabilize their descent. But it was no use. The pod's engines were badly damaged, leaving them at the mercy of the moon's gravity. Zorthnax pressed against Draco's side, his small body trembling with fear. The ground rushed up to meet them, the pod slamming into the rocky surface with a bone-jarring impact. Draco was thrown forward in his restraints, his head cracking against the control panel. Stars exploded behind his eyes as pain lanced through his skull. For a long moment, there was only silence, broken by the hiss of escaping air and the crackle of damaged systems. Draco forced his eyes open, blinking away the blood that trickled into his vision. Zorthnax lay motionless beside him, and for a heart-stopping moment Draco feared the worst. But then the creature stirred, his eyes fluttering open as he let out a weak whimper. Draco sagged back in his seat, relief washing over him. They were alive, battered and bruised, but alive. Through the cracked view screen, he could see the looming shape of the secret base rising from the crater floor, its armored walls glinting in the harsh sunlight. They had made it, but as Draco watched the distant flashes of the space battle still raging overhead, he knew their fight was far from over. Back on the surface of the Tarkalian homeworld, Captain Hunter surveyed the smouldering wreckage of his landing craft, his face grim. Sergeant Thompson and Private Kim stood at attention before him, their armor scorched and dented from the ferocious battle with the Sargus beast. Private Kim stepped forward, his voice shaking slightly as he made his report. "Sir, there's something else. When I was pursuing the Tarkalian child, I was attacked by some kind of dog, a big one, with a silver collar. It protected the kid, sir, like it was trained to." Captain Hunter's brow furrowed, his mind racing. He activated his comlink, patching through to the USS Prometheus high above. "Prometheus, this is Captain Hunter. I need information on a K9 unit deployed to the surface. Black German Shepherd, silver collar, over." There was a crackle of static, then a voice responded, tight with tension. "Captain Hunter, this is Admiral Graves. The K9 unit you're referring to is part of an experimental program, genetically enhanced dogs, trained to protect civilians and neutralize threats. But there were concerns about their reliability, the risk of them turning on their handlers. We thought we'd lost them all in the initial assault." Captain Hunter's jaw tightened, a spark of excitement kindling in his chest. "Admiral, one of those dogs is down here, and I think it might be the key to finding that Tarkalian child." "Then you have your orders, Captain. Find that dog and find that child. We need any intel he might have on the Tarkalians' defenses. The fate of this entire operation could depend on it." "Understood, Admiral. Hunter out." Captain Hunter turned to his men, his eyes hard. "You heard the man. Spread out and search the area. That dog is our top priority now. Move out." As the soldiers fanned out into the smoldering ruins of the city, Captain Hunter's gaze turned to the sky, where the distant flashes of the space battle still raged. Somewhere up there, the Tarkalian child was making his escape. But not for long. One way or another, this war would end, and Captain Hunter would be the one to end it. Draco stumbled from the smoking wreckage of the escape pod. Zorthnax clutched to his chest. The little creature whimpered softly, pain lancing through his injured body with each movement. Draco scanned the barren, crater-pocked surface of the moon, his eyes locking onto the distant shape of the hidden base. Its armored walls rose from behind a towering rocky outcropping, a promise of safety amidst the chaos. A low rumble filled the air, growing louder by the second. Draco's head snapped up, his heart leaping into his throat as a human dropship descended from the inky blackness of space. Its hull bristled with weaponry, the barrels trained on the wrecked escape pod. They'd tracked him. Draco turned and ran, his feet pounding against the hard-packed dirt. He sprinted toward the base, desperation lending speed to his strides. The dropship touched down behind him with a thud that reverberated through the ground, the hiss of hydraulics filling the air as the loading ramp lowered. "Remember, I want the Tarkalian alive." Colonel Viktor Ivanov's voice crackled over the dropship's comms, his tone cold and hard. He stood at the top of the ramp, his muscular frame encased in sleek black armor, a pulse rifle cradled in his arms. The Special Forces soldiers fanned out behind him, their faces hidden behind polarized visors. Ivanov was a legend in the human military, known for his ruthless tactics and complete disregard for civilian casualties. He'd spent decades fighting in the dirtiest, most brutal conflicts across the galaxy, his name spoken in hushed whispers by friend and foe alike. And now he had only one objective: capture the Tarkalian child, no matter the cost. Draco risked a glance over his shoulder, his stomach clenching with fear at the sight of the soldiers pouring from the dropship. They moved with swift, predatory grace, their weapons sweeping back and forth as they scanned the barren landscape. Ivanov led the charge, his eyes locked onto Draco's fleeing form. Laser blasts sizzled through the air, the searing bolts of energy kicking up plumes of dust and rock around Draco's feet. He jinked and weaved, clutching Zorthnax tighter to his chest. The base loomed ahead, tantalizingly close. Just a little further. Back on the ravaged surface of the Tarkalian homeworld, Max loped through the rubble-strewn streets, his nose pressed to the ground. The scent of the Tarkalian child hung in the air, faint but unmistakable. The big German shepherd had slipped away from Sergeant Thompson in the chaos of the battle, driven by an unshakable urge to protect the small blue-skinned alien. Captain Hunter and his men followed close behind, their weapons at the ready. They tracked Max's movements through the shattered city, the dog leading them towards the escape pod's launch site. As they approached, the ruins of a once mighty Tarkalian base rose from the debris. Its walls were pockmarked with scorch marks and craters, testament to the ferocity of the human assault. "Sir, the kid must have escaped to their moon base," Sergeant Thompson said, his voice tight with tension. "We've got reports of a single pod making a break for orbit during the initial assault." Hunter nodded, his jaw tightening. He keyed his comlink, the device crackling to life. "USS Prometheus, this is Captain Hunter. The Tarkalian child has escaped to their hidden moon base, requesting immediate orbital support and reinforcements for a retrieval operation." "Affirmative, Captain," came the reply, the voice distorted by static. "Reinforcements are en route. Secure that base and capture the Tarkalian at all costs. Prometheus out." Hunter turned to his men, his eyes hard. "You heard them. Prep for orbital insertion. We're going to that moon and we're not coming back without that kid. Move out!" As the soldiers scrambled to obey, Max stood at the edge of the launch site, his ears pricked forward. The scent of the Tarkalian child still lingered in the air, a ghostly trail leading up into the stars. The big dog whined softly, a strange sense of urgency settling into his augmented bones. He had to find the child, had to keep him safe. And so, as the first human reinforcements began to thunder down from the heavens, Max turned his nose to the sky and set off into the unknown, chasing a scent that only he could follow. The hunt was on. Laser blasts sizzled through the air as Draco sprinted towards the base, Zorthnax's limp form clutched tight to his chest. Colonel Ivanov and his soldiers pounded after them, energy weapons spitting deadly bolts of superheated plasma. Draco's lungs burned, his muscles screamed for oxygen, but he pushed himself harder, terror and adrenaline surging through his veins. The rocky outcropping loomed ahead, the base entrance concealed within its craggy face. "Almost there," Draco gasped, his words lost in the roar of weapons fire. Zorthnax stirred weakly in his arms, a soft whimper escaping his jaws. Suddenly, a hidden seam split the stone, revealing a reinforced blast door. It ground open with a hydraulic hiss, the base's automated defenses recognizing Draco's biosignature. Draco hurled himself through the opening, the door slamming shut behind him, just as Colonel Ivanov and his men reached the outcropping. Inside, emergency lights bathed the corridors in pulsing red. Alarms blared, the base's personnel scrambling to battle stations. A group of Tarkalian scientists and soldiers rushed forward, their faces tight with worry. "Draco, "Thank the gods you're alive," a grizzled Tarkalian commander said, relief washing over his battle-scarred features. His gaze fell on Zorthnax, the creature's blood staining Draco's torn clothing. "Get that Zryket to the medbay now!" Two medics gently took Zorthnax from Draco's arms, placing him on a hovering stretcher. They disappeared down a side passage, barking orders into their comms. The commander placed a hand on Draco's shoulder, his grip firm but reassuring. "You've been through hell, kid. Let's get you somewhere safe." Draco could only nod, exhaustion and fear taking their toll. The commander guided him through the maze-like corridors, past armored bulkheads and buzzing command centers. They reached a small, Spartan room, a simple cot and desk the only furnishings. Outside the base, Colonel Ivanov snarled in frustration, his face twisted with rage. The Tarkalian child had slipped through his grasp, vanishing into the bowels of the moon base. "Find me a way in," he growled, his eyes boring into his soldiers. "Tear this mountain apart if you have to." The soldiers fanned out, scanning the rocky terrain for any sign of weakness. Private Jameson, a wiry man with a knack for infiltration, called out from behind a massive boulder. "Colonel, over here looks like a ventilation shaft." Ivanov stormed over, his lips curling into a predatory grin as he saw the metal grating. "Good work, Jameson. Get that cutting torch fired up. We're going in." High above the moon's surface, the USS Prometheus hung in the starry void, her hull bristling with weaponry. In the ship's drop bay, Captain Hunter and his men strapped themselves into a specialized orbital insertion pod, the sleek craft designed to punch through the moon's atmosphere and deliver them to the surface. "Prepare for drop," Hunter barked, his voice crackling over the pod's comms. The pod shuddered as it was released from its docking clamps, plummeting towards the moon below. A light blinked on Hunter's console, indicating an incoming transmission. He patched it through, Colonel Ivanov's voice filling the pod. "Hunter, we've found a way into the base. Ventilation shaft, heavily fortified, but we're cutting through now." "Understood," Hunter replied, his jaw tightening. "We'll hit them from above, you hit them from below. That child doesn't stand a chance." Back on the war-torn surface of the Tarkalian homeworld, Max limped through the rubble, his sleek black coat matted with blood. The genetically engineered dog had lost Draco's scent in the chaos of the ambush, the stench of death and weapons fire overwhelming his enhanced senses. Sergeant Thompson and Private Kim picked their way through the ruins, the bodies of fallen Tarkalian soldiers littering the ground. They had emerged victorious from the firefight, but at a heavy cost. Max whined softly, his ears perking up at a faint familiar scent drifting on the breeze. Draco. The scent was weak, but it was there. The dog let out a low bark, drawing Thompson's attention. "What is it, boy?" Thompson asked, kneeling beside the wounded animal. Max nosed the air, his nostrils flaring. Thompson's eyes widened in understanding. "The kid's scent, you've got it?" Max barked again, the sound echoing through the shattered remains of the Tarkalian base. Thompson turned to Kim, a grim smile spreading across his face. "Looks like our lucky day. That dog's going to lead us right to the prize." Ear-splitting klaxons reverberated through the moonbase's cramped corridors, red emergency lights pulsing in time with the urgent wailing. Commander Kraltok's booming voice crackled over the intercom, his words clipped and tense. "All personnel, we have a breach in the ventilation system. Human soldiers have infiltrated the base. Protect the Tarkalian child at all costs." Draco jolted awake, his heart pounding against his ribs. He leapt from the small cot, his bare feet slapping against the cold metal floor. Zorthnax. He had to get to Zorthnax. Draco sprinted through the twisting passages, dodging Tarkalian soldiers as they rushed to defensive positions. The sounds of close-quarters combat echoed through the base, the harsh bark of human assault rifles, the sizzling hiss of Tarkalian plasma weapons, the screams of the wounded and dying. He burst into the medical facility, his eyes wild with fear. Zorthnax lay on a gleaming surgical table, his small body swathed in bandages. A Tarkalian medic hunched over the wounded creature, her hands a blur as she worked to stabilize him. Suddenly the blast door at the far end of the room exploded inward, a gout of flame and shrapnel. Human soldiers poured through the breach, their weapons spitting death. Colonel Ivanov strode at their head, his eyes cold and merciless. The Tarkalian medic snatched up a plasma pistol, firing wildly at the invaders. A burst of bullets stitched across her chest, and she crumpled to the floor, her blue blood pooling beneath her. Draco froze, terror rooting him to the spot. Ivanov's gaze locked onto him, a predatory smile spreading across his scarred face. "There you are, you little bastard!" the colonel growled, leveling his rifle at Draco. A Tarkalian soldier tackled Ivanov from the side, knocking his aim wide. The two warriors grappled on the floor, fists and elbows flying. More Tarkalian troops flooded into the room, engaging the human soldiers in a brutal melee. Draco snapped out of his paralysis, snatching up Zorthnax and cradling the creature to his chest. He ducked behind an overturned gurney as bullets and plasma bolts crisscrossed the room. The Tarkalian soldiers began to disengage, fighting a desperate rearguard action as they retreated from the medical facility. Draco risked a glance around the gurney, his heart sinking as he realized his path to safety was cut off by the raging battle. He glanced down at Zorthnax, the creature's breathing shallow and labored. Tears stung his eyes. They were trapped, alone and defenseless, with no way out. Outside the base, Captain Hunter and his men advanced towards the hidden entrance. Energy blasts from the automated defenses sizzling past their heads. They returned fire, their weapons chewing through the rocky outcropping, seeking to disable the turrets and clear a path inside. On the war-torn Tarkalian homeworld, Sergeant Thompson cradled Max's limp form, the dog's blood staining his battle-scarred armor. Private Kim slumped against a shattered wall, clutching a gaping wound in his side, his face pale and slick with sweat. Thompson keyed his comlink with a shaking hand, his voice ragged with exhaustion and desperation. "Command, this is Sergeant Thompson. Private Kim is down and the K-9 unit is critical. Requesting immediate medevac. The dog is the key to finding the Tarkalian child. We can't lose him. Not now." As the battle raged on the moon base and the Tarkalian homeworld lay in ruins, the fate of an entire species hung in the balance, resting on the shoulders of a terrified child and a dying dog. The war had reached its tipping point, and there could be no turning back. The command center shook with the sounds of battle as Colonel Ivanov and his soldiers poured into the room, energy weapons blazing. Kraltok leapt into action, his energy sword flashing as he charged the invaders. The air sizzled with the clash of weapons, the stench of ozone filling the room as Kraltok's blade sliced through armor and flesh. "Fall back!" Kraltok roared to his troops, his sword a blur of motion as he held the line. "Regroup in the hangar bay." The Tarkalian soldiers fought a desperate rearguard action, plasma rifles spitting bolts of searing energy as they backed towards the exit. Ivanov pressed forward, his face twisted with rage, his rifle barking in short, controlled bursts. In the medical facility, Draco huddled in a corner. Zorthnax clutched to his chest. The sounds of battle grew louder, the floor trembling beneath his feet. Suddenly the door exploded inward, torn from its hinges by a massive armored figure. Sergeant Grigory Petrov stepped through the smoke, his energy cannon humming with power. His gaze swept the room, locking onto Draco's terrified face. Petrov grinned, a predatory smile spreading across his scarred features. Draco scrambled backwards, shielding Zorthnax with his body. Petrov raised his cannon, the barrel glowing with barely restrained energy. Just as the soldier's finger tightened on the trigger, a deafening explosion rocked the base. The walls buckled, cracks spreading like spiderwebs as debris rained down from the ceiling. Petrov stumbled, his shot going wide as he fought to keep his balance. In the command center, Captain Hunter and his men surged forward, energy blasts ripping through consoles and equipment as they engaged Ivanov's soldiers. The explosion had caught both sides off guard, the power conduit's destruction sending a chain reaction rippling through the base's structure. "The base is compromised," Kraltok shouted over the chaos, his sword flashing as he cut down another human soldier. "All troops evacuate now!" The Tarkalian soldiers broke contact, sprinting for the hangar bay as the base shuddered and groaned around them. Ivanov roared with fury, ordering his men to pursue, but Hunter and his team pressed the attack, forcing the colonel to fall back. On the Tarkalian homeworld, Sergeant Thompson paced outside the medical tent, his armor still splattered with Max's blood. Private Kim sat nearby, his wounds bandaged, his face pale. The tent flap opened and a doctor emerged, his expression tired but relieved. "The dog is stable," he said, wiping his hands on his scrubs. "He'll make a full recovery." Thompson sagged with relief, a smile breaking across his face. He activated his comlink, his voice tight with excitement, as he relayed the news to Captain Hunter. "Sir, Max is going to make it, and I think he's our best chance at finding that Tarkalian kid." Back on the moon, Draco raced through the collapsing base, Zorthnax bouncing in his arms. Debris fell around him, the floor buckling and cracking beneath his feet. He could hear Petrov behind him, the soldiers' heavy footsteps drawing closer with each passing second. Ahead, the hangar bay doors loomed, a promise of escape and safety. Tarkalian soldiers poured through the opening, scrambling aboard the waiting ships. Kraltok stood at the entrance, his sword still crackling with energy, urging his troops to hurry. Draco put on a burst of speed, his lungs burning, his heart pounding. He was almost there, just a little further. Draco sprinted through the collapsing base, Zorthnax clutched tight to his chest. Chunks of debris rained down, the ceiling fracturing as support beams buckled. Energy blasts sizzled past, scorching the walls. Draco ducked and wove, barely avoiding a falling girder. Ahead, the hangar bay doors gaped open, Tarkalian ships blasting off one by one. At the last ship, Kraltok waved frantically, shouting for Draco to hurry. Draco put on a burst of speed, his heart pounding. Almost there. Just then, Colonel Ivanov and his soldiers burst into the hangar, weapons blazing. Laser blasts ricocheted off ships, leaving molten pockmarks. Draco zigzagged, trying to evade the deadly barrage. Suddenly, Zorthnax jerked in Draco's arms, a pained yelp escaping his jaws. Draco looked down in horror to see a charred hole in Zorthnax's side, the edges still smoking. The little creature went limp, his eyes glazing over. "No!" Draco screamed. He stumbled to a stop, falling to his knees. He cradled Zorthnax, hot tears spilling down his cheeks. The ship's engines roared to life, the heat of the thrusters washing over Draco. Kraltok hesitated at the bottom of the ramp, his eyes wide with anguish. But more of Ivanov's soldiers poured into the hangar, their rifles spitting death. Kraltok glanced from Draco to the soldiers, a look of grim resolve settling over his face. With a final shout, he slapped the ramp controls, racing up into the ship as it began to lift off. Draco barely noticed, lost in a haze of grief. He rocked back and forth, whispering broken apologies to Zorthnax. The ship roared out of the hangar, disappearing into the smoke-filled sky. Colonel Ivanov and his men surrounded Draco, their weapons trained on the weeping child. Ivanov's face twisted into a cruel grin, a chuckle rumbling in his chest. He stepped forward, reaching down to grab Draco by the arm. Just then, Captain Hunter and his soldiers burst into the hangar, their armor scorched and dented. They skidded to a stop, taking in the scene, Draco kneeling in a pool of blood, Zorthnax cradled in his arms, and Ivanov looming over them. "Stand down, Colonel," Hunter barked, leveling his rifle at Ivanov. "The child is our only priority, not your personal glory." Ivanov spun, his eyes wild with rage. "You dare give me orders, Captain. I've waited far too long for this moment." Suddenly a black shape hurtled out of the smoke, slamming into Ivanov with bone-crushing force. It was Max, his fur matted with blood, his teeth bared in a vicious snarl. The two tumbled to the ground, Max's jaws clamping down on Ivanov's arm. The colonel screamed, his rifle clattering away. The weapon discharged as it hit the ground, the energy blast ricocheting wildly. It struck Captain Hunter square in the chest, burning through his armor like paper. Hunter crumpled, his rifle slipping from his hands. Max released Ivanov, staggering away. He limped towards Draco, his breathing labored. With a soft whine, he collapsed next to the Tarkalian child, his eyes fluttering closed. The hangar shuddered violently, massive cracks racing up the walls. Chunks of the ceiling began to rain down, smashing ships and equipment alike. Ivanov's soldiers scattered, seeking cover from the impending collapse. As the roof caved in with a deafening roar, burying the hangar in tons of rubble, the Tarkalian ship carrying Kraltok and the other survivors streaked away from the moon, vanishing into the star-flecked void of space. The war between humans and Tarkalians would rage on, but for Draco and Max, their tale had reached its end. Two unlikely allies united in a final moment of shared loss and desperate courage. You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.